Good morning, Will. How are you doing today?
Hey, Arrow, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Well, dude, you've got the word. You've got a path that people need to follow, and because a lot of people are asking questions right now. We it's not that we've lost the American dream. We just need to know where is it and how can we reboot it. And you're doing it.
No, amen. And that was the point in writing the book, right? Is I've been fortunate to have some amazing experiences. Serving my country as an undercover officer in the CIA, being in Congress, being on the cutting edge in business with technology companies. And I've been fortunate. I've had more opportunities than my father had. I want to make sure my nieces and my nephews and current kids and future grandkids have more opportunities than we had. And so part of that was putting some of those ideas down. 72% of Americans think the country is on the wrong track.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a trend that has been growing for some time. We don't have to continue on this current path. We got to do something. We got to do something else. And I learned a lesson. The second lesson you learn when you're at the farm in the CIA is get off the X. The X is the location where something's going down, and that's the last place you want to be when it's going down. And so I tell that I go into that, and with some fun stories from the CIA, and I feel like that's where we are as a country right now, and we need to do something different. And I try to give some ideas on what I think different really means.
I love your philosophy on get off the X, because as a third degree black belt, they don't train us to go and fight people. They train us to walk around people. Don't create a scene. And people think, oh, I'm going to stay away from you. No, you want to be with me because we're going to be positive. I love how you are doing that in this book. Is that you're not trying to scare us. You're trying to share with us.
Look, I appreciate that, and I love that story from your experience in martial arts. My dad is 89 years old. He grew up in East Texas in the middle of Jim Crow. My dad's black, my mom's white. They met in California, moved to South Texas in 1971, and they live in the house they live in now because that was the only house that would be sold to an interracial couple in South Texas in the 70s, right? and my dad, for all the things he had to experience, he always taught me, my brother and sister, have a PMA, a positive mental attitude, and that's something that I've taken. And look, one of the sections in the book, I talk about we need leaders that are willing to inspire rather than fearmonger.
Yep.
And we're sick. People are sick and tired of this. Like Texas we just went through a primary election on March 1st. 3 million people voted. That's Republicans and Democrats out of 30 million.
Oh, geez.
That means 27 million people were just like, you know what? There's nothing out there I'm not smelling anything y'all are cooking, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's the opportunity. That's the opportunity for people to say, hey, have good ideas. People don't always have to agree with you, but tell people what you believe in, why you believe in, and what you're going to do. And that's what I try to do in American Reboot.
Speaking of Texas, and this has been going on for a couple of years now, we at least over here in Carolina, we keep hearing the stories that Texas wants to break away from the United States and be their own nation. What's going on over there in Texas that the rest of us don't see?
Well, look, there is when you're from Texas, and when somebody asks you where you're from Texas, you say Texas, right? You don't say the South, you don't say right. America, you say Texas, right? So we've had this independent streak in us since 1836, after the Battle of the Alamo, and we won our independence from Mexico at the time. And so that's part of that flavor. Now, look, the majority of Texans recognize the difficulty of such a thing. That's something that I don't think it's going to, whatever happen, the impact of that would have on our economy, even though I think if Texas was its own state or its own country, it would be like the 9th largest economy in the world. And so, So look, Texas is big, right? And we're proud. But at the end of the day, I think most Texans are excited and proud to be Americans, and we think America is the greatest place on the planet.
When you talk about American Reboot, a lot of people instantly think of their computers, and when that blue screen comes up, I mean, American Reboot might be 3 or 4 different times. I mean, because it can't happen just in the blink of an eye.
For sure, right? Look, I was lucky when I was in high school. I grew up in San Antonio. I had an internship at this place called Southwest Research Institute, the largest private research entity in the United States. And I was exposed to robotics, and it blew my mind. I was like, I want to do that. And so I studied computer science in high school. I studied it in college. And the first job I had in college was at a computer lab. And whenever the computer wasn't doing what it needed to be doing, I didn't know how to fix it. I would hit that reset button, right? And what I'm proposing is hard, right? Our structures are not built for this. When you look at the divisiveness in politics, it's designed that way. When 92% of House congressional seats are decided in a primary, that means you're talking to the extreme edges on either side of the party, not the middle. And so what I'm talking about is really hard, but we have to do it because our future is at stake. We talk about now about it being in a new Cold War with Russia.
Right.
Well, we're actually in a hot war. The new Cold War is with the Chinese government. The Chinese government has said that they're trying to surpass the United States of America as the global superpower. That's not my opinion, Arrow. That's not me laying in bed at night thinking about what's going on. This is not me collecting intelligence. This is what the Chinese government has said about themselves in English. Okay, and so if they were to achieve this goal, what does that mean? That means the U.S. economy is no longer the most important economy in the world.
Right.
What does that mean for everyday citizens? That means our 401ks, our retirement plans aren't going to grow as fast. Our kids are not going to be able to get the best paying jobs with American companies. It goes even further. Like when the Chinese government is starting to realize the importance of soft power. We just got out of the Olympics, and everybody was talking about that young girl from the young woman from California who played for the Chinese government rather than the American government.
Yep.
Look, I'm not going to debate the decisions of an 18-year-old girl, but why did the Chinese president Xi Jinping put the full court press to get her to do that? He understood the value of that change and about a young woman who grew up in Southern California making a decision to play for China. And so this is the issue, and we barely talk about this, and that is going to decide our futures, and that's going to decide whether America stays the leader and global leader for the rest of this century. And so this is a competition. This is not about us just becoming our best selves. Mm-hmm. This is about us becoming our best selves because we have to, because we are locked in this competition.
Well, that might be the reason why I lead to this next question, in the way that big companies like Amazon are now saying, hey, look, we're going to pay your education bill. You work for us, you're going to college. I mean, I love it that these businesses and these major corporations are starting to do that, because we've got to smarten up, man. We got to get technology moving on the American side.
Look, 100%. So there was a number of things that I learned when I was researching this book. And one of them was there's these international test scores that, like, I think it's seventh graders take and juniors in high schools take on, like, math and science. We do a terrible job on those tests, right? I don't even think we're in the top 25 when it comes to these tests, and that has changed over the years. We used to be number one. When you look at the number of students in every other country, they're not always choosing to come to U.S. universities. Mm-hmm. We used to be the best. Like, if you were, we attracted the brain gain from every other country, and that helped fuel our success. It helped fuel our economy. It helped fuel our ability to create amazing companies. And what these American companies are realizing is that they need a workforce that is able to deal with the latest and greatest technology, and they're going to have to build it themselves. Mm-hmm. That also means our schools have to do a better job of providing the basic foundations. Look, you and I probably we took typing classes
Yes, we
when
did.
we were in middle school, right?
Yeah.
And Mavis Beacon typing, and because that was a basic skill, because like you weren't going to be able to get any kind of job if you didn't know how to type.
So true.
And so right now coding to me is that thing, and we need to make sure only 40% of high schools across the United States have a computer science class.
Mm.
That's terrible. Okay. We should be introducing coding into middle schools. You were talking about your grandkids. Your grandkids are digital natives. They were born with these tools.
Yep.
And so this is what we need to do. And it's a public-private partnership. Government can't do it alone. Business can't do it alone. We got to be able to work together in order for make sure that we stay competitive for the rest of this century.
When you say American reboot, are we headed toward a thought revolution or a physical revolution? Because, my God, I mean, what we've seen in the past 2 years of people, they're sharing their voices, but I don't see any activation.
Yeah. So look, here's what I would say, right? I get that frustration, right? Because ultimately people feel like they're not being heard,
Right.
or they're being told one thing, and then when hey, you do this, if you vote for me, we're gonna do this thing, and then that thing doesn't happen. And so people get frustrated. You also have social media and mainstream media, focusing on those things that actually divide us. But here's what I've learned: like, way more unites us as a country than divides us. And I truly believe that even now, at a time when we've seen the most partisanship that I've ever seen. Like, I'm a Black Republican that represented a 71% Latino district. Nobody thought I had a chance. And when I won, nobody thought I had a chance in re-election, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I was able to pull these things off that nobody thought could be done was because I realized very quickly, whether I was in a 92% Latino town like El Paso that votes 90% Democrat, or a uber Republican ruby red district in a place called Medina County, I talked about the same things: putting food on your table, a roof over your head, and making sure the people you love are healthy, happy, and safe. And when we focus on those things, then we're going to be able to evolve. If we don't do that, this frustration is going to continue to grow. And the fear is obviously that that frustration turns into violence, but it doesn't have to be that way. And there's other ways. And look, as the populace, we need to demand that and from our elected officials, but we also need to model the behavior that we want to see coming from our elected officials.
Yeah, you remember those days when the National Enquirer was that thing that we used to say, it's just the National Enquirer. It just seems like conspiracy is now on the tongue of so many different people in the lawmaking business. I mean, we've got a representative in Georgia, and we've got a representative here in North Carolina that just lets it fly. And it's like, I don't get it.
Look, I don't either. Again, I go back to all the things I learned in elementary school, right? It's like I couldn't, if I was writing a paper, I couldn't use information from a comic book,
Yeah.
right? Like I had to, right? Like I had to have a proper book. I couldn't use magazines, right? And so we were taught how to separate fact from fiction, right? Also, I think that we need to look at folks in our media. If doctors and architects have professional standards and codes, why are we not seeing that same level of self-policing amongst the media as well too, right? The Rand Corporation talks about truth decay, and that is where the inability to separate fact from opinion, and then the purposeful blending of that area between fact and opinion, and then the ability to go down any kind of rabbit hole with people on social media and thinking that's ultimately the truth. Why do people succumb to that? I don't know the neurophysiological reasons behind it, but it requires people like us to speak up and say, hey, here is what we should be doing. Here is what's fact, and here's what's fiction. And this erosion of trust in all of our institutions that is what it's allowing these people to believe, because they don't know where to go to get quality information.
You know, I love the way that you include people in everything that you're talking about. And I'm still inspired by when you were talking about your father and how you're going to continue the learning with your children and their children and stuff. And that brings me to a question of, do we need to share more of our history with our kids? You take a book like American Reboot and you sit down with your teenagers and you say, you need to read it, get your point of direction, and let's meet in the middle and let's have a conversation, because I'm passing my history to you and I want you to be prepared for where we came from.
Eric, look, man, it's so funny you say that. I agree with you 100%. I had this long story. I'll try to make it short. When I was running the second time, I spoke at a friend's 10th grade English course, and this kid asked me, "Is it better to be loved or feared?"
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, that's kind of a weird question to ask, off the cuff in a 10th grade class. Well, they had been reading The Animal Farm, and I reread that book recently, and it's fascinating to me because Animal Farm came out 1 year before the end of World War II. And George Orwell, which I didn't know that was a pen name, George Orwell had a difficult time getting it placed, because at the time the Russians were giving it to the Nazis in World War II. And so any kind of criticism of communism, even in the United States back in 1946, was impossible. And so in reading this, there was an introduction by a guy who I had never heard of, and he wrote a biography that was a Pulitzer Prize winner about growing up in between the First and the Second World War. And it was fascinating to me because those experiences and seeing and hearing how he articulated this is so valuable to life now, and understanding our history is super important. When I was lucky to serve overseas in the CIA, and I saw how America became an exceptional nation, not because of what we took, it's because of what we gave.
Yep.
Every other superpower took land, they took resources. The United States was the first after World War II to give a helping hand. And if you don't have that perspective, if you don't have that history, you don't understand that we've been through a lot of this stuff at the same time. Why do we have a Fourth Amendment? We have a Fourth Amendment because of unreasonable search and seizure of papers. Like the line includes the word papers. Why? Because the Redcoats were sick and tired of colonists writing op-eds, anonymous op-eds, and they were trying to bust down the doors to find old drafts to be like, aha, you're the dirtbag that wrote this thing, right? And so we've had this, we've experienced this before, we've gotten through it before, and that's why understanding history is important, so that we can make sure this little experiment we call America continues to uplift humanity for another 247 years.
You speak of the military. My sister has 2 sons that are currently stationed in Poland. And I mean, the way of the world right now, I'm horrified only because we assumed that Russia was a strong nation, and we're seeing what's happening in Ukraine. Are we in danger? Are we as strong as what we say we are?
Look, it's a great question, and we need to always practice those assumptions, right? And question those assumptions. And in short, I say we are. But we can never rest. We should always be talking about evolving and getting better. And one of my fears is always that we're prepared to fight wars of the past, not wars of the future. And that is where we're going to ultimately get impacted. Can we operate if the Chinese government turns off all the phones at the White House or at the State Department, right? These are some of the questions. Can we defend against something like that from, something happening on our grid that mimics what happened in Texas last winter and almost brought the grid down, right? So we should always trust but verify, right? That's actually a Russian proverb that I've learned. And being in the cybersecurity business, everybody always says their defenses are great, but when you pop the hood and start, messing with their what's under it, you realize you're not as prepared. So we should always be testing and preparing. And what's happening in Ukraine is an example for us to go back to our first principles and make sure that we are able to do the things we think we can do.
Is this the reason why you put focus on the middle and not the edge?
100%, because that's where 80% of Americans are.
Yeah.
And it's funny. I always ask people, when people when constituents would be angry with me about something, I would always ask them, do you agree 100% with your spouse? And they would all laugh, right? Because they knew the answer, right? I knew the answer. I'm like, do you agree 100% with your best friend? No. So why do you expect to agree 100% with your elected officials? And so for me, the folks that are toiling every day to put food on the table, a roof over their head, and take care of their families, those are the people that make this country great and keep this country going. And they're the ones that we should be thinking of and talking about and inspiring to get out to the polls and vote. And you'll see, if we do that, if we change the people, that if we change the electorate, you change the product. And there's so many more people that aren't participating, and the reason is because they don't like what's out there.
What a brilliant heart you've got. What's your website so people can follow you, give you some love and things like that, because they need to know more about you, Will?
Look, I appreciate that. Read the book. My website's willbehurd, HURD.com, willbehurd.com. And on all the socials, I'm just Will Hurd.
God gave you a good name, dude. Will Be Heard. My God.
I know. When I ran for student body president at Texas A&M, that was my tagline. You will be heard,
That's beautiful. Please come back to this show anytime in the future. The door is always going to be open for you.
I really appreciate that. Thanks for the time.
You be brilliant today, okay, sir?
Thank you. You do the same.